palace opposite the entrance to the palace. As soon as he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor, and he held out to her the golden scepter that was in his palace opposite. Then Esther approached and touched the top of the scepter. The king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be given to you." Then Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for the king." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther desires." So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. While they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Esther answered, "This is my petition and request. If I have won the king's favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare for them, and then I will do as the king has said." And now from Luke, book 7, verses 11 through 17. Soon afterward, he went to the town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went with him. As he approached the gate of the town, a man who had died was being carried out. He was his mother's only son, and she was a widow, and with her there was a large crowd from the town. When the Lord saw her, he was moved with compassion for her and said, "Do not cry." Then he came forward and touched the bier, and the bearer stopped. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, rise." The dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized all of them, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen among us. God has visited his people." This word about him spread throughout the world, the whole world of Judea and all the surrounding region. May these words from Esther and from Luke inspire us to live for love.
Thanks be to God. There is a moment, you may know it, when you are standing at a threshold and you cannot be entirely sure which world you belong to. You hold too many things inside yourself to pick a side cleanly. You've been shaped by more than one place, more than one people, more than one story. And the room you are about to walk into doesn't make room for all of you. That is the moment Esther lives in, on the third day when she puts on her royal robes and walks into the inner court of the king of Persia. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace. When the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor, and he held out to her the golden scepter. Notice what the text gives us in miniature. Persians feast while Israelites fast. Out in the streets of Susa, Mordecai sits in sackcloth. The Jewish community mourns, keens, goes without food. Inside the palace walls, however, the wine flows and the golden scepter gleams. Esther exists in both of these spaces at once. She has just fasted for 3 days alongside her people. Now, she is clothed in royal robes, stepping into power. This is her hybrid identity, and it is both her greatest strength and her greatest vulnerability. She is the only one in the story who can walk between these worlds. But walking between worlds means that neither world fully claims you. You are always a little suspect on both sides. There is something unmistakably contemporary about that position. We are living in a cultural moment that demands allegiance. Political affiliation, we are told, now defines not just your policy stance, but your personhood. Which side are you on? The question is everywhere, in our families, in our news feeds, in our congregations. And the pressure to answer cleanly, to pick a lane, is nearly unbearable. For those of us who cannot or will not, the silence reads as betrayal to both sides. But Esther does not resolve her hybridity. She inhabits it. She fasts with her people and then dresses as her power requires. She does not collapse the tension. She carries it with her into the throne room, and the tension itself, that held complexity, becomes the thing that saves Israel. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. There is no reason Jesus should be at Nain. No one summoned him, no one sent word. He simply arrives at a gate at the exact moment a funeral procession is passing through. Luke gives us two crowds moving toward one another, toward the threshold. The crowd following Jesus, full of the living, and the crowd following the widow's son, full of grieving. They meet at a threshold. Jesus touches the bier. In the purity codes of his tradition, this makes him ritually unclean. He crosses a line that his tradition has drawn, and yet he does it. He speaks to the dead man as if speaking to the living. And the dead man sits up and begins to speak. The crowd's response is electric. A great prophet has risen among us. They reach immediately for the tradition, for Elijah, who raised the son of the widow of Zarephath, for Elisha, who restored the son of the Shunammite woman. Luke wants us to hear these echoes. Jesus is doing what the prophets did, but he is also doing something the prophets did not do. Elijah and Elisha prayed. They stretched out over the bodies. They worked. Jesus simply speaks. He commands death to reverse itself with the authority of one who made the world. He is, in this moment, reenacting and surpassing. He holds two identities at once: the prophet in the line of Israel's healers, and the one who stands before Israel's healers and says, I am more than this, human and divine. In the tradition and beyond it, neither fully and both completely. These two texts, Esther and Luke, are not obvious companions, but read together, they offer us a theology of threshold crossing, of hybrid identity, of the power that is released when we stop trying to be one thing. Esther fasts for 3 days. Jesus raises a dead man on the road. We are an Easter people who speak the language of 3 days and resurrection without always pausing to ask, what needs to be raised in us? In a moment defined by culture wars, in which picking a side is sold to us as survival, there is a particular kind of deadness that comes from hiding your complexity, from amputating the parts of yourself that don't fit the required allegiance, from performing a simpler version of who you are so you can belong to something. That deadness is real, and it accumulates, and it has consequences, not only for you, but for the communities that need your whole self in order to be whole themselves. Esther could have passed entirely into Persian life. She was already doing it. Her very name is a Babylonian name, not a Hebrew one. Mordecai is the one who calls her back to her people, to her risk, to her fullness. It costs her something to be whole. But it is precisely her wholeness, the queen who fasted with the exiles, that can walk into the throne room and change things. And Jesus. Consider what is at stake at Nain. He touches the bier. He speaks across the boundary of death. He is human enough to be moved with compassion for a grieving widow. And he is something more than human enough to do something about it. Neither identity alone would get you to that place. In what ways are all of us holding such multiple identities and hiding them? For example, you almost all know that I, like Esther, am multi-ethnic. Code switching happens even without my conscious thought. I hold other hybrid identities. We all do. Well-educated but grew up poor, hidden disabilities, and an ableist culture. You know yours, even if the rest of us do not. What might we raise in 3 days if we were to embrace rather than conceal our complexity? Making the decision to stop hiding in my whiteness was one of the hardest decisions in my life. It was like constantly ignoring pebbles, not just one, pebbles in your shoes, to continually look away from all of the quiet racism surrounding me, infusing me. When I chose to stop, I freed my spirit. All the energy that went to concealment could now go to the more honest work of revealing. When I stopped othering myself, I was finally able to be myself. What sacred complexity is yearning to be free within you? What opportunities for connection are we missing while we hide from our hybrid selves? I'm not sure if I ever had a true relationship before I stopped trying to be white. How could I? If we're not honest with ourselves about who we are, how can anyone else know us? We're missing all of the opportunities for connection if we are hiding. Whose throne room do we have access to precisely because we have lived in more than one world? This is the truly sacred work of being our whole selves. Not only are we resurrected from the expectations of the culture, we are empowered to leverage our privileged identities for the benefit of all. Not only the marginalized parts of ourselves. We also invite the resurrection of connection in the throne rooms we enter. Ivory towers are lonely places. Everyone benefits when we refuse to choose between the parts of ourselves. The arts and humanities in this country are under assault in ways that are not merely political. When funding for the National Endowment for the Arts is stripped, when grants to opera companies in Montana and chamber music societies in Detroit are rescinded, what is really being stripped is the infrastructure that allows communities to tell complex stories about themselves. to hold contradiction, to be more than one thing at a time. The arts are a vessel for our complexities. Culture wars thrive on oversimplification. They require you to caricature the other side, which also means caricaturing yourself. They require you to become a flatter, more two-dimensional version of who you are so you can fit inside the required allegiance. The irony is that this impoverishes everyone, including those who think they are winning. Esther did not win by becoming more Persian. She won by being the Jew who wore the crown. She held the contradiction long enough to save her people, and then she sat down to the feast twice on different days. The text pausing over the delay, the banquet offered and deferred, because she understood that timing and patience and the willingness to stay in the room are themselves a form of power. The widow of Nain didn't ask Jesus to raise her son. She wasn't even speaking. She was weeping, and Jesus saw her. The text says he had compassion for her, which in the Greek means something more like his guts turned over. His body responded to her grief. That's not the response of pure divinity, serene above human pain. That's the response of someone who is also human, who knows what it is to lose someone, who knows what it is to watch the ground come up to meet you. And then, from that place of shared humanity, he does something no ordinary human can do. The two identities work together. One gets him to the threshold, the other gets him through it. We tend to think of complexity as weakness, of holding more than one story as indecision, of standing between two worlds as rootlessness. But the witness of Scripture across these two very different texts is that the threshold is not a place to escape from. It is often the place where the miracle happens. You are more than one thing. You hold histories and allegiances and languages and griefs that don't all fit into the same camp. You have been shaped by people and places that are in tension with one another. And this is not your flaw. This is your calling. Because the widow in Nain did not need a prophet. She had plenty of prophets in her tradition. What she needed was someone who could be moved, who was human enough to weep and more than human enough to command death to stand aside. She needed someone who would not stay in their lane. And the Jews of Susa did not need a queen who had forgotten she was Jewish. They needed the queen who remembered, who fasted in her palace, who prayed in her crown, who walked into the room holding all of herself, even the parts she had been told to hide. After 3 days, things rise. After 3 days, the fast gives way to a feast. After 3 days, what looked like an ending becomes an opening. The question the tradition always puts back to us is, what are you fasting from? What part of yourself have you buried in the name of belonging? And what might rise if you let that part of you rise? So when you go from here, go as your whole self. It is sacred. Amen.